Hey guys, we're back again. We got a strike and all that, so make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It all began in the year 2045. Despite the presence of strange monsters, humanity still lived on Earth. Some people tried to fight these creatures, but many ended up dying or losing hope. However, not everyone was in such a desperate situation. Among them was a different man. He was not an ordinary soldier, but the commander of the planet's last line of defense. His name was Han Sung, and he had already killed countless monsters. To understand better, one must remember that the war between humans and monsters had been going on for decades. There had been many long and bloody battles, to the point that humanity was on the brink of extinction. Even so, there was still a chance for victory. It was at this critical moment that something strange happened. Han Sung was surrounded by a magic circle and disappeared in front of his companions. In truth, he had been teleported. He woke up in an unknown place, chained, while mysterious voices claimed that they had finally managed to summon the hero from another world. Then, an old man approached, congratulating Han Sung for arriving in the Empire. Without much explanation, the elder declared that he should kill the Demon King since he had been summoned as a hero. Obviously, Han Sung did not want to fulfill this absurd mission, but was forced to accept it due to a magic called the Oath of Binding. Every time he resisted, he was electrocuted. The old man also asked him not to fight against the magic, promising it would not hurt him if he behaved gently. In short, they ripped Han Sung from his world in a very unfriendly way, demanding that he kill the Demon King. In return, they promised they might let him return home, but only if he saved the Empire first. In other words, he was forced to accept the mission under pressure, even though he did not want to. From that point on, Han Sung spent years fighting as a summoned hero. He took part in countless expeditions and defeated a massive number of monsters. Time passed, and in the end, he managed to kill the feared Demon King. However, his journey was not yet over. The old man appeared again, saying there was one more mission. This deeply irritated Han Sung, since they had promised he could return after the Demon King's death. But the elder explained that saving the Empire was not just about defeating the king. There were still opposing forces to unification, and all of them needed to be eliminated. The next target was a blonde young man, and only after defeating him would Han Sung be freed. Once again, the request was made with forced politeness, and since he had no choice, he accepted. Han Sung then went to the kingdom of the Teutonian Knights and defeated the designated target. Before finishing him off, he apologized to the blonde young man named Frieren, known as Battle, explaining that the decision had not been his. But Badel simply replied that Han Sung did not need to apologize because he too would soon be discarded. And he was right. In the next scene, Badel was stabbed in the back by a silver-haired man named Count Brandenburg. It was clear that this was the real reason Han Sung was being discarded. After all, to that empire, a hunting dog was only useful while it could still bite. Lying on the ground, wounded, Han Sung was furious. He knew he was about to die, but swore he would not forget that humiliation. He would one day make the Empire pay for everything they had done to him. And so that night, one life ended forever, while another had just begun. The former hero Han Sung, now dead, reincarnated into a new body. He awoke in a different world, reborn as a baby. His new mother was a blonde woman he did not know, but the father, on the other hand, was a much more remarkable figure. He was Saksin, the most powerful dark necromancer on the entire continent, and also a duke of the Empire. Han Sung's new residence, now in another body, was in the necropolis, home of the famous Black Tower. Before dying, Han Sung had hidden a reincarnation stone, a magical artifact capable of transporting the user's soul into a random body after death. He kept this secret from the Empire, as he already suspected he would be betrayed and wanted a chance for revenge. Despite the risk, he was lucky. He reincarnated into one of the most powerful families of the Empire. At least this time, he was born into nobility. Right after being born, Han Sung realized something was strange. He did not cry, and the people around him began to say it might be a bad omen. But inside, Han Sung just thought there was no reason to cry. After all, his mind was that of an experienced adult. To test if the baby was okay, one of the maids decided to give him a hard slap on his tiny butt. Even feeling pain, Han Sung held firm and was outraged at the parents, thinking it was absurd for anyone to hit a newborn just to provoke a cry. Things became even more confusing when his mother approached. Unlike the maid, she did not hit him. She gently touched his skin with care. In that moment, Han Sung remembered something important. Even though he had spent years in war, he had never felt such pure and comforting human warmth. For the first time in a long while, he cried. Not from pain, but from emotion. A simple gesture from his mother was enough to break through his inner coldness. And so, even with all his past life experience, he cried like a real baby. Time passed quickly. 8 years had gone by since his birth, and his parents happily talked about how fast time flew. The boy, now named Dale spent most of his days studying in the library since the age of 4. This showed his deep interest in magic. However, his mother insisted that he should not study dark magic, even though he was the son of a necromancer. While they talked about it, a servant entered in panic, warning that something was happening in the study where Dale was. When Saksun arrived at the scene, he noticed his son was emanating a strange magical energy. The mother became desperate and started scolding him immediately. But Saksun remained silent, carefully observing that mana, which clearly made no sense. To him, it was impossible for an 8-year-old boy to possess such energy. Wanting to understand what was going on, Saksun decided to confront his son directly. But as always, he did not do it gently. Dale was caught off guard, trying to come up with an excuse. However, to his surprise, his father simply commented that this was to be expected from his heir. Although he could not teach him necromancy, Saksun appeared satisfied. He was proud of his son's potential, even if he would never admit it openly. Hearing that he could not learn necromancy made Dale furious. That directly affected his revenge plans. Even so, since he had nothing else to do in the study, he simply left. Meanwhile, his father, Saksun, commented that he had already chosen the birthday gift for his son, which would take place the next day. On the day of the party, the hall was full. Several guests walked around, all flattering the Duke and asking where the young master was. Dale, however, was on the second floor, bothered by all that attention. In his previous life, he had lived in solitude, so it felt strange to be surrounded by so many people trying to please him. Besides that, he was still reflecting on what had happened the day before. It had all started when he touched an old book, which contained traces of his previous life, and his mana went out of control. This left him puzzled. He also did not understand why he could not learn necromancy, since his body seemed perfect for that type of magic. And to top it all off, he was still thinking about the gift his father had prepared. While he was lost in these thoughts, his mother appeared. It was the day he would turn 8 years old. At her side was a woman with an imposing presence, an elder of the Blue Magic Tower, known as Lady Sepia, one of the greatest specialists in water magic. It was clear that she would be his new teacher, which indicated that this was the birthday gift chosen by his parents. Water magic, focused on defense and disruption, was the opposite of necromancy, which left Dale even more frustrated. Lady Sepia, without wasting time, asked to speak with him alone. Outside, she directly said that Dale was probably disappointed. Not angry, because if he were, he would have yelled at his parents, but disappointed on the inside. She knew he wanted to learn necromancy, the magic that represented his father's legacy. It was at that moment that Sepia revealed a secret. When Helena, Dale's mother, was still being courted by Saksun, she feared his dark reputation. To calm her on the day of the wedding, he and the elders of the Black Tower, who always wore black robes dressed in white. Moreover, he made a solemn promise that the dark legacy of necromancy would not be passed on to the next generation. Because of this, Helena did not accept that her son would study that kind of magic. In the end, Dale ended up being harmed by a promise made years ago. Sepia acknowledged that this was a waste, considering the potential and magical affinity Dale showed. That was why she said she would try to persuade his mother. Even if she could not convince her, Sepia stated that she would not give up on teaching the boy. This declaration left Dale confused. He knew that elves like her valued natural laws and generally considered necromancy a taboo, but Sepia explained her point of view. To her, it made no sense to condemn necromancy when the divine power of priests could also revive people. If both powers brought back the dead, why was only one accepted? In Sepia's eyes, in the end, necromancy and divine resurrection were basically the same thing. After all the explanations, ignoring unnecessary details, Dale's first goal was to form a magic circle. To do that, he needed to place his hand over his own heart and concentrate. In that world, unlike Earth, the air was filled with mana, but humans could not absorb that energy directly, as pure mana was too aggressive. Because of that, the human body needed a filter, and that filter was the magic circle around the heart. Lady Sepia gave the instructions patiently, guiding him not to rush, as forming the circle usually took about a month. But she was not dealing with just any child. She was dealing with Dale, who completed the task in just 5 minutes. That, of course, made no sense to her. To demonstrate, Dale summoned his mana directly from the heart, as if he already had complete control over the process. Surprised, Sepia asked him to cast a real spell, something that would cause pain in the heart, since it would be the first time his magical lines were being used. In his previous life, Hansung did have magic, but it was of a different nature. He used spells engraved directly on the body, which were not naturally cast, making the process painful since he did not have any magic circle back then. Unlike his old body, this new one had a natural talent for magic. With that in mind, he focused, let the mana flow to the tips of his fingers, and created a magical fragment with lethal potential, something capable of striking directly at the throat of the Empire itself. Upon seeing the perfect geometric shape of that spell, Sepia could not believe what she was seeing. She thought perhaps Dale had focused only on the aesthetics of the the magic, and not on its real power. But right after that, he cast the spell at a tree, which exploded from the inside out. Faced with that demonstration, Sepia was speechless. Not even her thoughts could keep up with what had just happened. The only thing she could think was, who was this 8-year-old child with such destructive power? When she went to the impact point, she realized that the spell Dale had used was, in fact, a basic magic spell, which made everything even more absurd, considering the devastating result. While she was still trying to understand, Dale asked if he had done something wrong, but Sepia's smile made it clear the answer was quite the opposite. He had perfectly executed the 3 golden techniques of magic: acceleration, rotation, and compression. And even more impressive was the fact that he had done it naturally, as if it were something simple. It was then that Sepia began to understand why Saksun regretted not being able to pass down the legacy of dark magic. In the next scene, Sepia declared that she could no longer teach Dale, which left Saksun confused. After all, she was an elder of the Blue Tower, one of the greatest authorities in magic, and yet she was saying she could not instruct his own son? But the explanation came right after. Sepia revealed that Dale had not only cast an offensive spell with perfection, but also mastered the 3 basic formulas with full control. In short, Saksun's son was incredibly talented, with a level of aptitude that bordered on the absurd. She made it clear that she was not refusing to teach Dale out of disinterest. On the contrary, she was eager to train him. However, there was a problem. Dale did not want to learn ordinary magic. What he really wanted was mastery of the dark magic of the Archmage, his father's inheritance. And as Sepia well knew, there was a promise made in the past that prevented that path. Even if he did not show it entirely, he knew that this matter was serious. After all, it directly involved the future of his son, and perhaps even the duchy itself. While this conversation was happening, Dale was trying to eavesdrop, but he understood almost nothing. Then some men appeared, and from Dale's reaction, it seemed they were trustworthy. He smiled and called one of them Uncle Helmet. Helmet said he had been facing all kinds of horrible creatures, which made it clear he had been dealing with a dungeon. These dungeons were considered one of the greatest threats in the world, second only to the Demon King himself. The damage they caused was immeasurable, and knights fought without rest to try to contain the monsters that came out of those places. In Dale's previous life, he himself had faced many of those monsters. In fact, in the territory of Satin, where he lived, nearly all of them had been exterminated by him. Even so, the Duke of that region took all the credit and ended up being named the next emperor. Back in the present, the conversation was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Dale's mother and father. Taking advantage of their presence, Elena congratulated her son for forming his first magical circle. Saksun, his father, also praised him and asked if there was anything he wanted. Deep down, Dale wanted to learn necromancy, but he knew he could not request that openly, so he feigned innocence and said he wanted a little sister, which created an awkward moment among the adults. Later that evening, Dale lay in his bed and ended up having a nightmare about his past life. In the dream, he saw the Count being stabbed in the back while asking why Dale looked so happy. The dream questioned whether just having loving parents and living in a comfortable house now meant he could simply be happy. But that was only an illusion. An empire would never leave him in peace, and he needed to be prepared for what was to come. After waking up from the nightmare, Dale began to feel an internal collapse. His magical circle went into reflux, and, trying to avoid making a scene, he stepped outside to breathe more easily. But his condition only seemed to worsen. That was when Sepia appeared. Every time she looked at Dale, she felt a strange sense of danger, as if something was deeply wrong with him. Still, she chose to help him, knowing that if he were corrupted by a malicious will, he might become someone beyond saving in the future. After stabilizing him, Sepia explained that the essence of magic reflected the heart of the mage. This meant that a person's magic could shift based on the traits of their spirit. In Dale's case, his magical talent was immense, but also extremely dangerous, as he had a natural affinity for life-taking spells. Because of this, Sepia handed him a book, saying it might be the last lesson she could offer him. The book carried a strange aura and had a demonic symbol on the cover. It was clearly a necromancy grimoire. Even so, it was the only gift that could help him master his magic. It was also a birthday gift, and Dale, deeply moved, could not hide his gratitude. He hugged Sepia sincerely, and honestly, who wouldn't? What stood out the most in all this was Sepia's behavior, which began to seem a little unusual. After all, where exactly had she gotten that necromancy book from? Even so, the story continued. A few days later, Sepia took Dale on a hunting trip, where he was supposed to use the magic he had learned. To prove he had mastered the technique, he managed to blow up a tree with ease. And when he used the spell on a rabbit, he showed no hesitation in taking a living creature's life. Seeing this, Sepia once again explained explained that magic could vary greatly from person to person, as it directly reflected what was inside the mage's heart. Even the names of spells during casting only existed to help form a mental image. Each magic tower held its own beliefs. For example, the red tower valued order through power, while the blue tower valued order through harmony. There were many other towers as well, each with a different ideology that guided their magical teachings. However, this topic was still too complex for Dale, so she set it aside for now. Back to the practical training. The first necromancy spell Dale used was zombification, a technique that consisted of controlling a dead body with magical threads. The spell itself was simple, but raised interesting questions. If he could control a body with magic threads, could he also cast other spells on that same body? With that in mind, Dale used his ice magic to create an armor around the zombified rabbit. To test if it worked, Sepia launched an attack and saw that the spell held up well. This was Dale's first true magical achievement, so Sepia asked if he wanted anything as a reward. He said yes. He wanted to learn basic water magic. For a moment, it looked like Sepia would accept, as she seemed interested in teaching. However, she refused. She explained that what Dale had done so far was only the most basic level of water magic, and like any other school of magic, it required progressive levels of study and practice. Learning one was already hard. Two for a child was nearly impossible. Dale was frustrated. He could not accept being denied. He knew he needed to become stronger to carry out his revenge. Upset, he decided to act on his own. That same night, he went to the mansion's library and started studying alone. He wanted to prove he could learn and surprise Sepia with his effort. He became so excited that he didn't even sleep. In the next class, Dale demonstrated that he had already fully mastered zombification combined with ice armor, which startled Sepia right away. But he did not stop there. He also showcased a new technique, merging an ice explosion with a corpse explosion, resulting in a violent burst of purple fire, accompanied by countless ice shards launched in every direction. Sepia was in shock. What Dale had done was, in practice, a combination of water magic and darkness magic. This qualified him as a dual mage, something extremely rare. She had never imagined that two such distinct magic types could be fused in that way. The ice shards scattered like blades, giving the technique a deadly nature. It looked like magic born directly from the battlefield, unthinkable for a child. It made her wonder what kind of world existed inside that boy. Leaving the topic of magic aside, peace did not last long. Suddenly, Helmut appeared, accompanied by a group known as the Black Cavalry, which was, in short, the main military force of House Saxon. That group, responsible for monster extermination, was led by Helmut, a prominent figure known as one of the seven swords of the continent. In simple terms, this meant he was one of the greatest swordsmen in the entire world. Given such a rare opportunity, Dale did not waste time and immediately asked Helmut to teach him the art of the sword. The request was quickly accepted, and the two returned together to the family territory. Upon their arrival, Sepia began reporting Dale's progress. Unlike the previous day, he had not only used a new offensive spell, but had also revealed himself to be a dual mage at only 8 years old. This revelation worried Saxon and Helena, the boy's parents. Sepia, in turn, explained that she had been teaching him the water magic he had requested. However, Dale's ambition extended beyond that. He wanted to master several types of magic, and as his teacher, Sepia eventually gave in to his wishes. Surprisingly, Helena did not react negatively as many would have expected. Instead of scolding Sepia, she simply asked her to continue teaching Dale water magic. Sepia, understanding the situation, accepted gracefully and apologized to Saxon for breaking her vow not to teach dark magic to the boy. This sounded strange, since Saxon had not truly objected. In fact, Saxon was more concerned about what Helena might say. But to his surprise, she was simply amazed to see that her son was a true prodigy. In light of that, Saxon was honest. He told Helena that he wanted to teach Dale dark magic. As a father and a mage, he wanted to pass on all his knowledge to his heir, because he knew the future of their territory would depend on their son's strength. So he apologized, admitting that even though it was a taboo, he believed everything would change if Dale became strong enough to silence all criticism. With Helena's approval, Saxon began the training immediately. The problem was that Dale apparently was not quite the genius he seemed to be. He had barely started learning with his father and was already being scolded. Saxon made it clear that, as long as he was his disciple, Dale should not use mediocre necromancy. Then he stacked several books in front of the boy. All of them were about the anatomical structure of living beings in that world, equivalent to advanced medical textbooks. Despite being only 8 years old, Dale was required to memorize all of it. After days of intense study, he had only learned the basics. Only then did the real training begin. The first task was to manipulate the body of a goblin. Saxon explained explained that, depending on the necromancer's skill, a high-quality body like that of a legendary swordsman such as Helmet could become useless in the hands of someone inexperienced. On the other hand, even the fragile body of a goblin could be turned into a powerful death knight if manipulated by a talented necromancer. In practice, this meant that a good necromancer could work with anything. However, as soon as Dale began the zombification process on the goblin, he started to struggle. That body's structure was completely different from that of a rabbit, and the mana connections were also more complex, which made control difficult. Seeing his son struggle, Saksin explained that accelerating rigor mortis to strengthen the dead body was a good strategy, but if overdone, the movements would become limited. So instead of just talking, Saksin decided to show him. Using his own dark magic, he began manipulating the goblin's body while explaining in detail that, although the ribcage had a vital function in living beings, protecting the internal organs, in necromancy it could be adapted for other purposes, depending on the mage's intention. Since the goblin they were using was just a corpse, it no longer needed the original function of its organs. In other words, Dale had to understand the structure of the body he was manipulating and adapt it to his own goals. Upon hearing that, Dale was surprised and curious, asked his father to explain the philosophy of the Black Tower. According to Saksin, the truth behind the magic of that tower was simple and yet profound. Truth exists within death. To reach that truth, a mage must first understand the weight of life. That statement triggered memories from Dale's previous life, especially a traumatic moment when someone begged for their life, but he killed them without hesitation. This raised the question of whether he truly understood the value of life or simply ignored it. As Dale's magical talent grew day by day, the news that Duke Saksin was teaching black magic to his own son quickly spread. This drew the attention of many people, including members of the royal nobility. The eyes of the world were now turning toward Dale and his family. During this period, Dale was also training in swordsmanship with Helmet. Despite being only 8 years old, he showed impressive skill. In one training session, he even managed to disarm Helmet, which surprised the swordsman. Helmet praised the boy, but Dale responded indifferently, saying he had not even used his full strength. Even so, Helmet commented that it was a shame Dale was a mage, as his skill with the sword was remarkable. He added that Dale did not need to try so hard, since he would have knights to protect him. But Dale replied that relying solely on guards and magic would be pathetic for someone like the Duke's son. In truth, he simply wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to train with one of the greatest swordsmen on the continent. Hearing this, Helmet was extremely pleased, saying he would love to have a son like Dale. At that moment, the conversation was interrupted by Helena, who called her son to give him some important news. The birthday gift he had asked for had arrived. It took him a moment to remember, but he soon recalled that he had asked for a little sister. He was very happy with the news, though he thought it had all happened very quickly. 10 months passed, and Dale finally met his sister. Helena gave him the chance to hold her in his arms. He carefully took her, and Saksin, watching, asked how he felt. The baby, calm, did not even cry when touched by Dale. He responded enigmatically, saying that his sister was at the same time light and heavy. Saksin then explained that this was the weight of a life, something he should never forget. Later, Dale was called by Sepia. She was waiting for him outside for another lesson. This time, it would not be a theoretical class, but a practical training session. In short, it would be a direct duel between the two. Sepia wanted to test how much he had improved over that time. As soon as the fight began, Sepia managed to dodge some of his attacks with agility. However, she noticed that Dale was holding back too much, which made her furious. She took it as an insult. To show she was not there to play games, she launched a sudden and direct attack, forcing Dale to defend himself in surprise. From that moment on, it was clear that he needed to take the fight seriously. With that in mind, the first thing Dale did was raise a wall of ice with an absurd density, which, according to Sepia, was equivalent to steel. At first, it made no sense for him to create such a barrier, since, theoretically, they were still in combat. However, while Sepia was trying to understand it, the wall suddenly opened. That was when Dale appeared, using an explosion spell that scattered numerous fragments. Judging by the damage shown in the next scene, it looked as if he had lost his teacher. Rewinding a bit, Dale had been happy with the spells he had cast. The ice barrier and the explosion, which looked more like a grenade than a traditional spell, pleased him. When he saw his desk completely perforated, he panicked, but it had only been an illusion. Even so, the attack had unexpectedly cornered Sepia, which surprised her a lot, as it was a tremendous amount of power for someone still in the first circle. For that reason, she acknowledged Dale's strength and congratulated him. Sepia was also happy that he had trusted her enough to use his full power. As a teacher, she felt proud to have such a promising disciple. She was so moved that, without realizing it, she was already talking to Saksin again. When he noticed a scratch on her cheek, he asked about it, and she replied that it was the result of a recent exercise. Putting that aside, Saksin asked Sepia for a favor. Before saying what he needed, he explained that they had received troubling news. A horde of orcs had crossed the mountain and invaded their territory, and the small cavalry they had would not be able to handle it. Just from hearing that, Sepia already understood where he was going. Saksun continued, saying that obviously Dale was still not ready for that kind of confrontation. However, as heir to the duchy, he needed to take responsibility for the future of that land. Of course, he would not send his son out unprepared. That is why he planned to give him a special artifact. This artifact had the ability to increase the user's power depending on what he was willing to sacrifice, such as mana or even life. Sometime later, Saksun took Dale to the duchy's artifact vault and explained that he needed to prepare for the battle ahead. Before that, he had to learn how to control the shadow power inherited from the Saksun bloodline and choose one of the artifacts kept in that place, many of which dated back to the era of the Demon King. The problem was that these artifacts possessed their own consciousness and ego. For that reason, Dale should not touch any of them carelessly. In truth, Saksun took a while to explain everything because Dale had already disappeared. As he walked through the vault, Dale began to hear voices coming from the ancient artifacts. Most of them reacted to the hatred he carried inside. Even so, he did not feel drawn to any of those objects. Then suddenly, when he looked back, he saw a cloak raised in front of him. That cloak was familiar. He remembered it from the time when he was still a hero. After all, he had fought the Demon King, so it was impossible to forget. The owner of that cloak was the former captain of the Demon Army, an enemy who used an extremely annoying shadow ability, capable of adapting and controlling shadows as if they were living organisms. And now, since Dale needed to learn how to master the shadow powers of his own lineage, it was obvious that cloak would be his choice. The moment he put it on, his body was pulled into a world of shadows. Inside, he would have to face and defeat those shadow entities in order to fully master the artifact. On the outside, Sepia and Saksun began to worry, since Dale had been trapped in that circle for quite a while. They knew that if he took too long, he would risk being corrupted by the shadows themselves. Depending on how long it took, they planned to intervene. However, it was not even necessary. Soon after, Dale emerged from that shadowy realm, thanking his teacher and his father. Saksun, seeing him, was surprised by how quickly his son had mastered the artifact. It was extremely advanced for someone so young. While still reflecting on that, Dale asked if he could take the opportunity to choose another artifact, since they were already there. With no reason to deny it, Saksun ended up allowing it. A few days later, in the duchy's training grounds, Helmut showed some concern as he watched Dale using the shadow cloak, which was known to be a difficult artifact to handle. When Dale said that he actually found it easy to control the cloak, Helmut was confused and wanted to understand how that was possible. Dale explained that the moment he put the cloak on, it simply clung to his body and refused to come off, as if it were seeking companionship. Helmut commented that perhaps Dale's heart was pure, and that was why the artifact wanted to get close. But in reality, the opposite was true. Dale had even found a way to silence the voices of the shadows inside the cloak. Putting that topic aside, Dale asked if they could have a combat duel so he could practice using the new relic. Helmut accepted immediately. Even so, Dale was a little nervous, but Helmut assured him that he would only use swordsmanship without applying any aura. That made Dale upset because he wanted to face Helmut at full strength, but even so, he went ahead. The goal of that training was simple: to allow him to adapt to the shadow cloak, since everything would depend on how he learned to manipulate that dark energy. Bringing the entire conversation to a close, Dale was the first to strike. Helmut defended calmly, which was impressive considering he was not even using aura and still managed to block the shadow-infused blow with just his sword. Right after, he advanced quickly toward Dale, who managed to dodge and counterattack by casting shadow magic at Helmut's feet. Even so, the knight defended efficiently and responded with another strike, forcing Dale to protect himself in a hurry. The battle continued, with Helmut applying constant pressure while Dale struggled to keep up and hold his ground. In the audience, everyone was in shock. Most knights present could not even exchange 2 blows with Helmut before being defeated, while young Dale, still just a child and not using any aura, was fighting the veteran on equal terms. This caused many to start seeing him as someone unbeatable. A few days later, the day of Dale's departure arrived. Helena tried to convince Saksun not to let him go, as she was worried about her son and feared he might get hurt. Despite that, Dale was moved by his mother's concern, but explained that he needed to become stronger. One day, he intended to inherit the duchy, and for that, he needed to protect his mother and his sister. That was why he sincerely asked Helena to understand the situation. After a brief silence, she eventually accepted it. At dawn, at Saksun's temporary army base, Dale's father asked his son to give the marching order in his place. This was symbolic because the Black Cavalry, the greatest pride of House Saksun, would one day be under Dale's command. Those men could already be considered his knights, and he should command them at least once. Upon hearing that, Dale felt proud and motivated. He thought that, in the future, all of that would be in his hands. With conviction, he declared that the time for departure had come. They were the blade of the duchy. The mission was clear. Against a group of about 1,000 orcs, Dale would lead 250 men, supported by the elite sharpshooter unit known as the Winter Watchers, who were positioned in the White Mountains. The strategy was to carry out a surprise attack, but to do that, they needed to cross a river quickly. The solution was to create an ice bridge using the magic of an elder from the Blue Tower. Before departure, Sepia wished Saksun good luck, curiously calling him Your Majesty. When it was Dale's turn, he also wished his teacher good luck, even knowing she would not participate in the battle. The gesture surprised and moved Sepia, who had not expected to have such a thoughtful disciple. To her, it was an unexpected joy. Sometime later, the scene shifted to the orcs' temporary base. There, the Winter Watchers launched their attack with absolute precision, eliminating several enemies right from the start. Even so, not all of the orcs had been defeated yet. Taking advantage of the opening created by the shooters' assault, the Black Cavalry charged swiftly toward the orcs. Observing the entire movement on the battlefield, Helmet asked Dale what he thought of the situation. After several calculations and reflections in his mind, filled with logic and mathematical comparisons, Dale concluded that this was a completely one-sided battle. Saksun agreed with the assessment, but Helmet warned that they still should not let their guard down. The ambush had been very well executed, but it still was not enough to defeat Nikolaos, who was leading the orcs. That is why the plan was to continue with successive attacks, gradually weakening the enemy until the last survivors were eliminated. Following that strategy, the troops received the signal to retreat. As the Black Cavalry was withdrawing, one of the soldiers was struck by an enemy spear. As soon as it happened, Saksun remarked that the man was already doomed. To him, that meant certain death. Hearing that, Dale was outraged. He found it absurd to consider someone dead while they were still alive and lying on the battlefield. Even worse was seeing both Saksun and Helmet simply watching, doing nothing to help. Receiving no response from them, Dale began to analyze the situation. He realized there was no safe path to reach the soldier directly. He then considered the possibility of a ranged attack, but knew that orc skin was extremely tough. So, he began planning an ice spell shaped like a high-speed projectile, similar to a rifle bullet from Earth. Following this line of thought, he managed to fire a precise long-range spell, hitting the target like a true sniper. The attack was so impressive that even Saksun and Helmet were surprised by the level of power and precision shown. While they were still processing what had just happened, Dale had already taken a horse and started descending toward the battlefield. Saksun, observing his son's actions, told Helmet not to follow him. Internally, he reflected on what it meant. That attack showed that Dale's inner world was already formed, stable, and complete. During the descent, Dale also reflected on his situation. By analyzing the field, he identified two problems. First, the soldier he wanted to save was in complete shock. Second, the magic he was using still took too long to cast, as it required a complex sequence of calculations and formulas to work. However, by reorganizing some of those mental equations, he managed to reduce the preparation time and fired a new shot, piercing the orc's head directly. Taking advantage of the opening, Dale approached the fallen soldier, who, completely terrified, asked why the young master was there. Dale simply replied that he should not worry. He stated that House Saksun would never abandon a loyal sword. Before he could even finish his sentence, the orcs resumed their attack. They would not wait for Dale to finish his declaration before acting. Seeing the enemies approaching, Dale activated the power of the Cloak of Shadows and summoned a Shadow Blade. The darkness of the night combined with the power of shadows created an environment completely unfavorable to the orcs. There was no fight. Dale simply ordered the cloak to devour everything in front of him. The first orc was completely swallowed by the shadows, leaving only his bones on the ground. After eliminating several enemies, Dale was forced to carry the wounded soldier, who could not even stand. The final scene looked strange. The young knight in black armor was holding the injured warrior in his arms as if he were a princess. To any outside observer, it seemed as if the soldier were the rescued damsel in Dale, the prince who had emerged from the shadows to save him. After the battle, Helmet ordered the rest of the Black Cavalry to finish the job and eliminate the surviving orcs. Later, back at their temporary base, Saksun called Dale in for a conversation. Without beating around the bush, he asked why the boy had done something as reckless as charging straight to the front lines. Dale, not understanding the reason for the scolding, explained that he thought he had done everything right and did not see why he was being criticized. Even so, he tried to justify himself. He said that the Knights of House Sashi, whom he would one day lead, needed to see in him a worthy example of the position he would hold in the future. But Saksun replied that this justification was weak. Faced with his father's reaction, Dale became upset and asked why he had done nothing when he saw a knight die right in front of him. Saksun then began to explain. He said that their territory was very close to the region dominated by by the Demon King, and because of that, they were constantly facing monsters. For this reason, knights were trained from a young age to fight without relying on rescue. They needed to learn to raise their swords on their own. Dale's action, although well-intentioned, gave the impression that there would always be someone ready to save them, which weakened their fighting spirit. And if that mindset spread, many knights would end up dead for believing they did not need to fight with everything they had. Even so, Saksun made it clear that he was not cold enough to abandon his own soldiers. If an enemy appeared that was too powerful for the knights to handle on their own, he would certainly intervene. In light of all this, Dale could not argue. Deep down, he knew his father was right. That was something he had already learned in his past life. Still, Saksun acknowledged that the way Dale acted, even if impulsive, left a strong impression on the knights. That is why he told his son not to be so discouraged. As time passed, the story of the battle against the orcs spread throughout the empire. Most of what was told was true, although some parts had been exaggerated with dramatic flair. Even so, the essence of the story remained intact. Dale was embarrassed by all the attention. What made him even more uncomfortable was that during a training session at the Knights' grounds, he was greeted as king. That made him even more flustered. But Helmet encouraged him, saying he should be proud of what he had done. After all, he was the future duke, and the knights were simply showing respect and pledging their loyalty. Soon after, a servant arrived announcing that the guest from House Orlhart had arrived. This house was led by Babel, the last enemy Hansung had faced before being reborn as Dale. The problem had started some time ago when Hansung killed Babel, which led to the total downfall of the Orlhart family, turning them into ruined nobles. What left a bitter taste in Dale's mouth was the fact that Helmet had been Babel's disciple, which created an uncomfortable link to that past. Ignoring those resentments for a moment, after Dale greeted his parents, the guests from House Orlhart arrived. In fact, it was just a woman accompanied by her daughter. That woman was Vanessa Orlhart, and at her side was her daughter, Charlotte Orlhart. Charlotte's behavior caused immediate discomfort. She did not bow before the Duke and still showed clear signs of rebellion. Even so, Saksun handled the situation calmly and asked Dale to show Charlotte around the house. However, she did not take the invitation well, and, in response, even slapped Dale's hand, creating a tense atmosphere. Faced with the situation, Vanessa asked her daughter to apologize to the Duke and his son, but Charlotte simply turned her back and walked out of the hall. Trying to smooth things over, Vanessa apologized several times to the Duke, explaining that her daughter was going through difficult times. The source of it was related to Count Branderburg, who had been appointed Inspector of the Hard Territory. This count was known by the nickname Pig King, not just because of his looks or manners, but because of his sick obsession with supreme talent. He coveted any skilled swordsman, regardless of gender or age, with the goal of producing talented descendants. This obsession even included girls who had not yet reached puberty. Faced with such a repulsive threat, Vanessa decided to seek out Duke Saksun to ask that her daughter at least be taken in as a servant in his house. The old nobility of the Orlhart family was no longer enough to protect Charlotte, and this seemed to be the only way to guarantee her safety. Sometime later, Dale found Charlotte at the training grounds. Surprised, he wanted to know how she had ended up there, and she herself admitted she had no idea. Leaving that aside, she showed concern for Dale's hand, asking if it was all right. When she heard it was, she looked visibly relieved, because what she really wanted was to challenge him to a duel. That left Dale confused, as he still did not understand the reason for so much hostility. After all, she had slapped him, disrespected him, and now, out of nowhere, she wanted to fight him. Of course, Dale could not say directly what he was thinking, so he preferred to ask what the true reason was behind Charlotte's actions. Deep down, everything was related to the story in which Dale had saved a knight, surrounded by 1,000 orcs. Moved by that legend, Charlotte wanted to prove her own strength in front of him. In addition, she wanted to show her family that she was capable of protecting them from a dangerous figure. That person was none other than Count Branderburg, someone for whom Dale felt a deep hatred. Faced with this, he thought that if Charlotte was an enemy of Branderburg, maybe one day she could become his ally. But before any alliance, he needed to show her how the world really worked. That is why he decided to accept the duel. As soon as the fight began, Charlotte launched her attacks relentlessly. At first, Dale could defend himself with ease. However, as the pace of her strikes increased, he began to struggle a bit more. This excited Charlotte, because for the first time she felt she had the upper hand. To better understand her motivation, it was necessary to remember who her father was. He was that blonde knight Dale had killed during his last mission, known as the Divine Sword. Charlotte's mother always spoke of him with pride, telling stories that inspired the daughter to train endlessly. Since then, Charlotte had been striving to be as strong as her father and protect her family with her own hands. Even though she had trained obsessively, Charlotte was still just a mage. Her attacks, no matter how powerful, could not surpass Dale's technique. and he even managed to disarm her during the duel. Faced with this, Charlotte was shaken. She could not understand how, being the daughter of the Divine Sword, she still could not win. Dale then explained directly, she was not her father, and with the strength she currently had, she would never be able to defeat someone like Count Brandenburg. Before Charlotte could fall into despair trying to figure out what to do next, Dale solemnly swore in the name of his own family that he would become the guardian of the Oralhart family. He promised to protect them until he himself became strong enough to crush Count Brandenburg with his own hands. But there was a condition. No promise came without a price. Charlotte would have to swear that, in the future, she would become the sword of his family. Faced with this proposal, she did not hesitate. Even if it sounded like a childish promise, it was a vow of great value for the future. Later, Dale told everything to his father, Saxon, who immediately wore a stern expression. He wanted to know if, by any chance, his son had used the family name out of pity. But Dale responded firmly. The bloodline of the Divine Sword was impressive, and Charlotte's talent with the blade was real. What he had achieved was something even greater. He had made the Oralhart family become the sword of their house. With that explanation, Saxon finally calmed down. Internally, Dale reflected that Brandenburg was probably furious at that moment. And he was right. The Count was indeed consumed by rage, so enraged that he had already sent assassins to capture Charlotte, but none of them had returned. That could only mean one thing. They had all been killed, since she was now under the protection of Duke Saxon. Meanwhile, Count Brandenburg clearly remembered the moment when he killed the hero from another world. To this day, he kept the sword he had used to pierce that hero's chest. That weapon was called Durandal. Even putting those thoughts aside, he continued with his own plans. He was eager to build the perfect bloodline on Earth, and for that, he needed Charlotte. That is why he told his subordinate to summon all available assassins. He was willing to pay any price necessary. Count Brandenburg was clearly not a stable person. His plans and actions already showed that something was wrong with him. Meanwhile, a week had passed since Charlotte's vow with Dale. Since then, she had been dedicating herself to her studies with determination. Every day she dueled with him under Helmet's supervision. Watching them fight, Helmet became more and more surprised. The skill and murderous intent present in that exchange of blows were so intense they did not even seem like children. Before the situation got more serious, Helmet decided to stop the fight. He said Charlotte had done well, but she did not want empty compliments, so he got straight to the point. He asked if she knew the true purpose behind using a rapier. Charlotte confidently answered that it was for thrusting. However, Helmet explained that it was not just that. The principle of the rapier required using the legs as a base. During the fight, there was a moment when she should have advanced and pressured her opponent, but instead she stepped back, missing the opportunity. In short, what he meant was that Charlotte needed to rebuild her fundamentals, as her movements were completely sloppy. Upon hearing this, she felt embarrassed. Dale, who was watching the explanation, began to worry. If Charlotte's natural talent were to combine with Helmet's teachings, he might end up falling behind. Setting that matter aside for a moment, the process of forming magical circles was explained. Basically, it consisted of rotating mana around the heart at a constant speed and then imprinting that movement into a ring of mana. Normally, this process took decades to complete. However, according to Sepia, Dale had already reached the second circle. In simple terms, the speed of mana rotation around the heart was measured in RPM, rotations per minute. First circle mages, for example, usually spun mana at 300 RPM. In Dale's case, his first circle was already operating at that speed, and the second had reached 400 RPM. This meant he already had enough mana to reach the third circle, since the requirement was 300 RPM for each ring. To test his limits, Dale decided to enhance his ice magic. He improved the resistance of the ice bullet and increased its rotation even more. Then he fired it at the first tree he found. The impact was so strong it left a huge hole in the trunk. Sepia, seeing that, did not hold back her praise. Dale replied that all that progress was thanks to her, but internally, Sepia was still shocked by the boy's absurd talent. At the same time that he made her uneasy, he also gave her confidence. While she was speaking, Charlotte hugged Dale, saying he was her pride. That sudden gesture made the boy a little suspicious, finding it odd. Still, he returned to his main goal and continued his magical training. He conjured an ice wall and then created something similar to a shotgun made of ice, capable of launching a shard that exploded on impact. This shot spread forward with great force. During this practice, Charlotte suddenly appeared, interrupting Dale's training. She was practicing the movements Helmet had told her to train. Dale thought her effort was cool, but he was curious about the unexpected visit. A little embarrassed, Charlotte apologized for having acted rudely and arrogantly. In Dale's view, she had been even more than that, but he decided to forgive her. He added that there was no need to be so formal, since they were the same age. After that exchange of apologies, Charlotte said she liked the duchy's weather. She said that after training, she always felt a pleasant cold. Hearing that made Dale happy. He had not imagined someone else would also enjoy that calm sensation. While the two talked, Saksun watched from a distance, accompanied by his wife Helena. He commented that there might be something more between those two in the future. According to Helena, a mother's duty was to help her son be honest with his feelings. Later, in the outskirts of the duchy, Helena went out to carry out her social work. She distributed clothes and food to street beggars and, whenever possible, helped those people find some weekly job. For her, no one should live permanently at the expense of the duchy. Meanwhile, Dale and Charlotte were walking together when a boy approached her, asking for help. He said his mother was in danger. Faced with the situation, the two decided to follow him. After some time walking, Dale noticed they were entering a dark and deserted alley. The place looked perfect for an ambush, and he was not wrong. As soon as they reached the spot, they were surrounded by bandits. The leader of the group quickly explained that their problem was not with Dale, but with the girl who was with him. Even so, Dale refused to leave. He had sworn to protect Charlotte, heir of the Oralhard house, from any threat. The leader of the bandits, a man with green hair, found that sense of duty amusing, calling it nothing more than a promise between children. He then ordered his subordinates to attack Dale. Charlotte, worried, remembered she was without her sword and asked how they would fight back. Dale said it was fine. In fact, this was a good opportunity to test his new ability, gained after reaching the second magical circle. When the bandits advanced, Dale reacted immediately, attacking them all at once. Realizing the danger, the leader ordered the others to retreat, but not all of them managed to escape. Dale's new ability, related to the Shadow Cloak, consisted of implanting a shadow creature like a parasite. Whoever was struck by it would turn into an undead being, moving according to the will of the shadows. One of the bandits, after being hit, became a giant monster under Dale's control, as if he were using necromancy. Faced with that, the bandit leader ordered his men to hold back the creature while he faced Dale himself. However, that decision was not very wise. Despite having an interesting ability, capable of creating clones and performing ranged attacks, the leader was caught off guard. Dale once again used his shotgun-like ice technique, hitting both the main enemy and another bandit in the back. Meanwhile, the monster under his control eliminated the remaining lackeys one by one. Back on Dale's side, the situation could not exactly be called a fight. It was more like a skill demonstration. The bandit leader had survived the first strike, although it was hard to understand how. Still, it did not matter much because the next moment Dale advanced and completely crushed his body with another blow. After ensuring the danger had passed, Dale approached Charlotte and helped her to her feet, asking if she was all right. She said yes. One of the bandits tried to escape, but there was no time. Dale then removed the shadow creature from the body that had been turned into a zombie and approached another fallen enemy. That bandit, desperate, began to beg for his life and said he would reveal everything he knew. However, before he could say a word, his head was pierced by the shadow creature controlled by Dale. Charlotte watched everything in silence, looking around. Dale noticed and asked if she was feeling unwell. That was the true face of the Saxon Duchy, and that was also the sword now in charge of protecting her. For that reason, it made no sense for her to think of it as wrong. Charlotte admitted she felt a bit afraid, but said she was fine. After all, as she had promised, she would protect him. After that oath, her destiny was to become his sword. Seeing Dale's current power, Charlotte was more eager than ever to grow stronger. For Dale, protecting her was also a way to ease the guilt he carried for having killed Babel in his previous life. For that reason, choosing her to become his sword in the future carried a far deeper meaning than he himself realized. Meanwhile, on the other side, Count Brandenburg's situation was worsening. He had been formally invited by the Duchy of Saxony. This invitation was, in truth, a summons, since he was being accused of kidnapping. It was the kind of invitation one could not refuse. Sometime later, he arrived at the duchy, where he was received by Saksun with apparent cordiality. During the reception, Brandenburg exchanged a few words with Saksun, keeping up appearances, but he did not hide the hatred in his eyes when he looked at Charlotte and Dale. Returning to the main issue, he began to argue that he would never do something as dishonorable as a kidnapping. He declared that he was a loyal sword of the Emperor. However, it seemed Saksun was not interested in dragging the conversation on. Without warning, he unleashed a powerful spell. Brandenburg managed to defend himself using Durandal, but the knights behind him were completely vaporized by the force of the spell. Recognizing the power of that magic, Brandenburg realized it was a high-level technique known as Nihi's Storm from the School of Dark Magic. Using his familiar Karamia, Saksun sent a clear message. If Brandenburg dared to lay a hand on any of his children again, he would kill every member of the Brandenburg family. With Brandenburg already kneeling under the threat, Saksun ironically remarked that if he was tired from the long journey, he could rest there for a while. It was clear that the Count would not accept such a suggestion. Trying to maintain his dignity, he replied that he had urgent matters to attend to and could not remain there any longer. As Brandenburg walked away, Dale began to reflect on the man who had just left. He knew the Count Count was one of the Emperor's most loyal followers, and so everything his father had shown to such a devoted faction could become a real bomb. That small spark, planted silently, had the potential to grow and turn into a great flame. It was the beginning of something that could one day allow Dale himself to sever the head of the so-called Saint of the Sword. While those rumors were spreading, saying that Count Brandenburg had knelt before the Black Duke, who was Dale's father, Saksun showed something surprising to Sepia. He revealed the corpses of the bandit guild members who had previously attacked Dale. Upon seeing those bodies, Sepia was filled with doubt. She began to question whether her teaching methods were truly correct or if she had somehow failed. It was then that Saksun, interrupting her thoughts, said that he needed the woman's help to raise his son. That was why he wanted to offer her the position of chief advisor. This meant she would officially become part of the Saksun family, and not just a hired tutor. After thinking for a few moments, Sepia accepted the role, commenting that it was probably the most difficult mission she had ever received. Some time passed, and the day of Dale's 10th birthday arrived. Unlike the previous year, the celebration now included many members of the Imperial faction. Among them, the most notable was Marquis Ulyss, whose presence, despite his friendly smile, made it clear that his intentions were far from peaceful. Observing the guests around him, Dale realized that the most important names from the imperial capital were there. That capital was the heart of the empire, and its nobles formed the base of power that supported the emperor's throne. The true reason for their presence at the banquet was a warning, a veiled message from the imperial family, showing they would not let what happened to the Sword Saint go unpunished. The main spokesperson for this message was none other than Marquis Ulyss, the leader of the Red Tower, an order that sought to impose control through strength. Remembering that, Dale felt discomfort in his body, for that same group had once conducted experiments on him, painful and unforgettable experiences. While he was thinking about that, Ulyss continued to praise him, calling him a genius and exalting his achievements. Dale, maintaining his composure, humbly replied that he was just a child and thanked the Marquis for his presence. After all the formalities, Dale left, wishing he could be training with Charlotte. However, since she served as Helena's assistant, she could not leave her duties. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a cry for help. He ran toward the sound and saw that a maid was being cornered by one of the party guests. The man said that, as a servant, she should entertain the guests in the best way possible, insinuating something unacceptable. At that moment, Dale appeared and confronted the nobleman. The man, clearly intoxicated, had the audacity to ask if Dale had ever been with a woman and claimed he would show him the true pleasure of life. But Dale was not interested in that kind of provocation. Without wasting time, the boy attacked him. Even so, he avoided killing the man, knowing that murdering someone linked to the imperial faction could have serious consequences. With his cheek cut, the fat noble was in shock and began to question what was happening. But Dale stood firm and ordered him to kneel. After all, that man had assaulted a servant of House Saksun, which was a serious offense. The noble tried to defend himself, saying he had been sent by the emperor and that Dale had no authority to act that way. However, before he could finish his protests, Saksun arrived accompanied by several guests, including Helena and Marquis Ulyss, who witnessed the entire scene. Meanwhile, Dale continued to demand that the noble kneel. In the presence of his father, Saksun asked his son what he was doing. Calmly, Dale briefly explained the situation and reinforced his demand that the man kneel as a way to make amends for his conduct. He reminded them that the nobles from the imperial capital had been sent with the responsibility of acting on behalf of the emperor. Even so, that man had insulted imperial honor by harassing a simple servant. To Dale, that was unforgivable. Marquis Ulyss, in front of everyone, declared that Dale's words were absolutely correct. In that very instant, the noble tried to flee, but Ulyss acted quickly and cast a powerful spell, killing the man on the spot. As he did so, the Marquis reaffirmed that his role was to eliminate all those who dared stain the name of the Empire or disrespect the imperial family. He also said he had great expectations for Dale's future. After this episode, all the guests left. The next day, the same servant who had been saved went to Dale's room to wake him up. Embarrassed, she sincerely thanked him for protecting her. Although hesitant, she managed to express her gratitude. Observing her expression, Dale noticed that the young woman felt intimidated by his family's presence. Even so, he remained firm. As the eldest son of House Saksun, he was determined to do his best to fulfill his duty, even if it meant taking down the empire itself. However, his peace did not last long. As soon as he met his father, Saksun immediately began questioning him directly, wanting to know what he intended with his actions. Dale, getting straight to the point, stated that if the hero from the other world had died during the battle against Babel, the bearer of the divine sword, the next target of the empire would have been the Duchy of Saxony. This statement surprised the Duke, who asked his son how he could be so sure of that. Dale, of course, could not reveal everything he knew, so he mixed real facts with fabricated parts to build a plausible explanation. According to him, the Empire had given up on completely exterminating the land of the Demon King, and, as a solution, had transferred that responsibility to the Duchy of Saxony. As a result, the duchy's territory was doomed to bleed constantly, becoming the target of endless attacks. Furthermore, both the Empire's nobles and foreigners had begun to refer to House Sachsen as the Clan of Darkness. Following that line of thought, Dale concluded that if the Empire was capable of discarding even its own hero, then eliminating any internal threat would be the most logical next step. He explained that he had discovered this information through old books and records, although in reality, he knew much more than he let on. To Sachsen, that was astonishing. In his mind, his son demonstrated wisdom far beyond his age. It was as if he had a brilliant mind, with strategic and mature thinking. In light of those statements, Sachsen asked his son how their house should act from that moment forward. Dale, brief and direct, replied that their duchy and the Empire could not coexist in the same world. In his view, the only solution was to destroy the Empire completely. This answer had an impact, and the father asked if the boy truly understood what he was saying. Dale responded that he did. However, he explained that he did not intend to raise soldiers and start a rebellion immediately. His plan was something long-term, over a 10-year period. He went on to say that currently several forces across the continent were already seeking independence, while others suffered directly from the Empire's actions. His goal was to unite these groups and build his own power, strong enough that the Empire could not face them head-on. With this plan in mind, Dale spent hours talking with his father, detailing his strategies until nearly the end of the night. Listening attentively, Sachsen was impressed by his son's level of vision and intelligence. He stated that Dale's talent was immeasurable. From that moment on, Sachsen made it clear that Dale was not just his firstborn, nor just a 10-year-old child. He was now the future leader of House Sachsen, with full authority within the family. Even at such a young age, his decision-making power would be equivalent to that of his father. And with this new power in hand, Dale declared that he had an important request to make. He wanted permission to take the tower trial in Necropolis. This trial was a grand tournament among mages where participants competed to rise in the tower's hierarchy. The challenge involved battles against magical guardians, and those who managed to defeat them earned the right to become elders. Whoever reached the top of the tower would gain the title of master, occupying the highest position in the institution. However, the test was extremely dangerous, with real risk of death. Moreover, Dale had not yet reached the third circle of magic, which was the minimum requirement to participate in the trial. Even so, he assured that he would find a way to solve that. Sachsen tried to dissuade his son from the idea, but Dale insisted, claiming that this was the best path for the future of the family. If he could prove his worth within the tower, it would strengthen his father's image in the magical world, showing that his heir was worthy of the name he carried. Additionally, it would allow him to build a real reputation, based on concrete achievements rather than exaggerated rumors. Faced with so many arguments, Sachsen accepted the decision and trusted his son's judgment. Shortly after, they departed for the city of Necropolis. When they arrived, they were received as true authorities, which they, in fact, were. Still, even after living 10 years in that body, Dale found the reverence everyone showed to be excessive. As they walked, people around them whispered comments about the rumors surrounding Dale's name. Not everyone believed in them, such as an arrogant blonde young man who considered himself superior and claimed he would take first place in the trial. Ignoring these provocations, Dale continued with his group and soon encountered Eris, an elder of the tower who also served as the general secretary, responsible for overseeing the tower's affairs in the absence of the Black Duke. Eris, who was also the general secretary of the tower and acted as its representative when the Black Duke, Dale's father, was absent, led the boy to the location where the test would be held. In total, there were 60 participants, including Dale, all of whom were graduates of the Magic Academy. At the beginning, Eris formally introduced herself and began explaining how the first test would work, located on the first floor of the tower. In short, it was a battle in a battle royale format. Each competitor wore an enchanted collar that tracked their life points. However, direct attacks on other participants were forbidden. Combat had to be carried out through necromancy, using corpses scattered across the testing field. Thus, competitors had to control the undead to strike at opponents indirectly. Each successful hit deducted points from the opponent, and if someone accumulated 3 penalty points, they would be eliminated. Only those with fewer than 3 points by the end of the test would move on to the next floor. Additionally, the use of any kind of magical artifact was strictly prohibited. Anyone caught using one would be immediately disqualified. Even before the test began, that same arrogant blonde youth started mocking Dale, saying it was absurd for a 10-year-old child to be there. Still, Dale ignored the comments and remained calm. When the test started, most of the other participants focused their attacks on on him, trying to eliminate him right away. However, Dale did not remain idle. He quickly controlled one of the corpses on the ground and used it for defense. On top of that, he began casting ice magic, which shocked everyone. This showed he was a dual-element mage even at such a young age, leaving many participants in disbelief. Using both ice magic and water spells on the corpse he controlled, Dale demonstrated magical proficiency far beyond expectations. The blonde youth immediately complained, claiming that such use was illegal, but Eris did not intervene at any point, which made it clear that the action was within the rules. After all, the only forbidden item was magical artifacts, not magic combinations. Frustrated by the situation, the blonde began encouraging the other competitors to attack Dale again. Since he could not use any magical items to defend himself, Dale chose to dodge the attacks and advance toward an armed zombie. After defeating it, he took the undead sword and enchanted it with magic, which was still permitted under the test rules. With this improvised magical weapon, he began cutting down both the zombies and any opponents who came near. Combining his intelligence and magical skill, Dale defeated one after another, overcoming every challenge on that floor. Interestingly, he left the blonde youth for last. Whether it was for revenge or simply to savor the victory, he chose to face him at the end. Regardless, after eliminating all the other 59 candidates, Dale became the only one approved to advance to the second floor. In the end, he could confidently say that first place in that test was his. The second phase of the test consisted of defeating a giant flesh golem. This stage was originally designed to be tackled by a group. However, since Dale was the only one who passed the previous stage, he had to face it alone. Even so, it was not a major challenge for him. Dale used a powerful dark magic spell that accelerated the decomposition of flesh, causing the golem to rot quickly. In this way, he easily defeated a boss that would normally require the combined effort of multiple participants. From that point on, Dale continued his journey by breaking record after record, advancing quickly through the following stages until he reached the 10th trial. Before facing it, he was granted a 4-day rest period. This break was meant to allow him to recover physically and mentally, since no other candidate had ever made it that far. While Dale rested, a rare event occurred. Candidate number 59, who had been defeated by him, was granted permission to retake the exam. Except for this isolated case, no other participant managed to move forward. On the same night that Dale completed 9 consecutive tests, his master Sepia approached him to congratulate him. She said she was proud of his progress, and taking advantage of the moment, the boy invited her on a date. At first, Sepia did not quite understand what he meant, but ended up accepting. After all, she thought that, since he was a child, he might not fully grasp the real meaning of a date. The next day, during the festival held in the city of Necropolis, the two walked together through the crowded streets. However, their outing was marked by long periods of silence. It was not an uncomfortable or awkward silence. On the contrary, Dale was simply reflecting. He thought that his master had always been that way, reserved and calm, and perhaps precisely because she trusted him so much, he wanted to get even closer. This desire for closeness had deep roots, tied to previous experiences. To better understand what Dale was feeling, it was necessary to go back a bit, to the moment when he was forming his third magic circle. During that process, he accessed a space known as the Mind Realm, something his master had mentioned before. Upon entering this mental plane, Dale felt as if a sword had pierced through him. Looking around, he realized he was in a completely empty and desolate place. Within that endless world, the only thing that truly mattered was the outstretched hand of his master. That was when Dale understood. Maybe deep down he wanted Sepia to be a part of that world. With this thought in mind, he ended up confessing his feelings to her. It was a strange thing to do, but he was sincere in what he felt. However, his master interpreted it as a childish crush. She said she liked him, but not in the way he had hoped. In the end, Dale gained nothing from the confession, which left him visibly frustrated. A few days passed after that episode. Dale still carried a sense of unease, as he felt his feelings had not been taken seriously. Even so, he refocused, because the final test awaited him. The 10th and final stage consisted of a magic duel. Dale's opponent would be the third circle master, Elbert Rosenheim. Unlike the previous stages, in this one, participants were allowed to use magical artifacts, spells, and any type of protection at their disposal. This meant Dale could finally fight with his full power. While he was still contemplating his strategy, Elbert did not hesitate. He attacked suddenly. Dale managed to defend himself in time, but his opponent had already prepared a series of offensive spells, launching a continuous barrage of attacks. Faced with that, Dale had to exert himself to the fullest, to dodge and endure each spell thrown at him. Dale was visibly irritated. His opponent Elbert had launched the attack abruptly, without any warning, and the examiners did not show the slightest concern about it. To make things worse, Elbert began reciting strange and over-the-top phrases about invocations from from the depths of darkness, thirsting for blood. It was clear he was trying to dramatize the battle, but the result was only embarrassing. In the end, all of it was just to raise a few corpses, which made his words seem even more ridiculous. Even in the face of such absurdity, Dale stayed focused. He dodged the attacks with precision, using his shadow magic to eliminate the undead that appeared along the way. However, Elbert took advantage of an opening and cast a spell known as Corpse Explosion. Apparently, the attack hit Dale directly, but just when Elbert thought he had won, he realized Dale was already behind him. Calmly, Dale congratulated him on the sneak attack, but warned that it would be the end. He then used the shadows to bind Elbert's legs. The shadows, hungry for energy, began to devour him. The situation became so dire that Dale had to interrupt his own magic to prevent his opponent from being completely consumed. And so the first fight ended in Dale's victory, and apparently it would be the only one. Upon witnessing his power, the remaining challengers gave up. From that point on, Dale continued climbing the floors of the tower, facing various guardians along the way. With each battle, he refined his 3 magic circles and deepened his understanding of necromancy. When he reached the 20th floor, he encountered an opponent who, in theory, matched his strength. It was a Dullahan, also known as the Headless Knight. According to the audience's comments, that Dullahan had been personally created by one of the elders of the Black Tower, which meant he was supposed to be incredibly powerful. However, as soon as Dale cast his shadow magic, the Dullahan knelt before him. Without hesitation, it followed the only command it received, to pierce its own body. In a matter of seconds, the Headless Knight took its own life. The battle, which had promised to be balanced, was decided unilaterally and almost in silence. It was at that moment that Dale remembered he was still taking a test. He realized that perhaps he had gone too far. After all, forcing a creature like the Dullahan, known for its unwavering loyalty to its master, to turn against itself was something unnatural. To avoid making the atmosphere even more awkward, Dale simply left the area. He could have continued ascending the tower. However, had he done so, he might have crossed the boundaries of humanity itself, entering a territory unknown even to the greatest mages. So, upon reaching the 20th floor, he decided to end his trial there. Upon exiting the Black Tower alongside his father, Dale was welcomed with military honors. Not only were the nobles of House Saxon present, but also all the mages of the tower, including the elders. Dale's feats had been extraordinary, and his reputation was beginning to echo throughout the northern region. Over time, the North reorganized to resume the hunt for orcs. This time, the mission was led by Dale himself. Although he was only a 10-year-old boy, he was entrusted with full command of the operation. Despite his age, none of the Black Knights doubted his capabilities. Sometime later, the reports reached Saxon. The mission had been an absolute success. A total of 145 orcs had been killed, with no casualties. Only 3 soldiers were injured. Given such results, Saxon did not hide his pride in his son. Even Helmut expressed admiration, praising Dale's conduct as a commander, and acknowledging that he already seemed used to the role. According to Dale, the reason for his growth as a commander was clear. Helmut had been passing down all the knowledge he had accumulated over the years. Battle tactics, leadership, cavalry maneuvers, everything was being taught carefully. If he continued at that pace, combining that learning with the practical experience he would still acquire, it would not be long before Dale was ready to govern his own territory. After delivering the mission reports to his father, Dale moved on to another part of his daily routine, training with Charlotte. It had been a while since she had appeared in combat, but it was now clear she had improved significantly. Even so, she still could not defeat him. Dale tried to praise her, recognizing her progress, but he noticed she was very proud. She did not like compliments that sounded forced or condescending. When people compared her to Dale, who had already reached the 3rd magic circle and passed the 20th test of the tower, she felt she was still far behind. However, there was an upside to that difference. Charlotte did not have to deal with rumors, flattery, or the constant pressure of being the center of attention. Dale had to admit that this part was truly bothersome. Even so, he sincerely commented that he was sure Charlotte would become much stronger in the future. That unexpected comment caught her off guard and left her a little embarrassed. Soon after, it was time for Dale to learn military tactics with Helmut. That day, Reut announced that they would study a maneuver called Hammer and Anvil. The strategy worked like this. The infantry, composed of knights with shields, held the enemy's advance on the front line, while the cavalry flanked from the sides, surrounding the opponents and pressing them against the shield bearers. This formation imitated the movement of a hammer smashing something against an anvil, hence the name. Changing the subject a bit, Dale took the opportunity to ask how Charlotte's training was progressing. Reut replied that she was doing well. Of course, compared to Dale's progress, there was still a noticeable gap, but her performance was positive. Even so, there was a problem. Charlotte's compatibility with the style of the order she belonged to was not ideal. To better understand that, one had to remember that mages refined their magical circles located near the the heart, thereby increasing their power. Meanwhile, knights refined their own aura. Just as mages had magical towers with well-defined hierarchies, knights also belonged to orders that shaped each warrior's path of growth. In Charlotte's case, she was tied to northern forces, such as the Black Cavalry and the Order of the Night Raven, both known for prioritizing brute strength and endurance. The problem was that Charlotte's fighting style was based on speed. As talented as she was, and she truly had the potential to reach the level of the Seventh Sword, it was likely that, if she continued down her current path, she would never reach the top ranks. To make things worse, her father, who had gained prestige using a style known as the Sword of Spring, was no longer alive. With the fall of many knights, that style was completely lost, which left Charlotte even more out of place within that structure. Setting that issue aside for a moment, Dale continued trying to boost his reputation through exhausting engagements and monster subjugation, until, unexpectedly, the day came when he would have to put everything he had learned to the test. A messenger arrived with an official request for war between territories. And the strangest part, the request came from a baron. It was an unexpected challenge. A baron requesting war made no sense in that context. Even so, it was clear that Dale would have to answer the call, and perhaps prove once again that his growth as a commander was not just theoretical. The forces opposing the Black Duke were even weaker than those of an average duchy. The reason behind this was a copper mine located exactly on the border between the two territories. In that world, however, territorial boundaries were not clearly defined, which made such disputes even more complicated. Setting that aside, the real reason the Baron had the courage to challenge the Black Duke was due to a potential alliance with the Brandenburg family. In exchange for support, the Baron promised to share the resources of the copper mine with them. Seeing an opportunity for profit, the Brandenburgs accepted the proposal and joined the struggle for the lands. With this movement, the Order of St. Magdalena also became involved in the war. This clearly showed that, even after all this time, the members of the Order had not forgotten the humiliation they suffered at the hands of the Black Duke's father. If you enjoyed this story and want to see the continuation of this battle for power and revenge, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. That really helps support the project and bring more content like this. See you in the next episode.